Caravan Conversations, which is the banner under which we are organizing today's event, is a literary forum where we try and organize literary events, political discussions, conversations on topics that we've covered in the magazine. And we're very pleased to have New York Times associate with us for this event today. India Inc. is their India blog, which they started around 4 months back. Today's discussion is on FDI and retail. I'm sure all of you know it's a very contentious topic. It's been put on hold for the time being. The government has sort of put it on a back burner, but yet it's something that we keep on discussing every day. The topic is not just about foreign investment in retail, but foreign investment per se also.
The issue of foreign retail has become a controversial one. There are people who feel that India is not ready yet for foreign investment in retail. And that there are others who say that no, we do need it. If Mr. Mittal can buy steel plants around the world, or set of steel plants around the world, why can't Walmart or Tesco or Waitrose come and set up shop in India? And then the whole host of other arguments which we will touch into, which we will get into now as we go along. With that, let me turn to you, Vivek. You're a professor of economics. Why should India do it?
We've gotten so tied up in this issue partly because there's been so little action on economic reform in the tenure of this current government. What in theory should be a relatively innocuous, relatively minor reform where there are relatively few losers, and again we can talk about that, to what extent the small shops would be affected. I don't think as much as people make out. But because the government pinned in some sense so much weight on this one, what should have been a relatively innocuous reform, and then of course it's blown up in their face. So I think in a certain sense there's a kind of asymmetric impact that had it gone through, it would have been good. I mean, as an economist I should say that foreign investment, one can make the argument about the gains from trade. So as trade in goods and services is good for you, trade and investment should also be good for you.
I have to say that I'm more in Vivek's camp than in the camp of saying this was a big item. And I'll draw a parallel between FDI and retail and something that happened in the early 90s when the first stage of reforms took place. At that time, the big liberalization was the liberalization of foreign investment in the power sector, if you remember. You know, the few ultra mega projects we had, I mean, biggest one of which was Enron, as you know, went into liquidation. Right? They were not able to produce power at a rate that Indian electricity boards and Indian consumers could afford. And it is only now, we're talking a good 18, 19 years later, when you have the national grids in place, you have the fuel linkages in place, you have the ports which have come up to deal with coal, you have all of that in place that you are now seeing these ultra mega power projects come up, indeed in which Tata is now participating. Now if you draw that parallel with Indian retail, I think we are in very much a similar state. Are you in a position to actually make money from retail? So, you know, this whole story about FDI coming into retail, what are the outcomes we want? There seem to be many infrastructural things that we need to do first to allow people to make money in this business. And I think those are the things that the reform should focus on. Let's get the ecosystem right, and then whether it's Indian money or foreign money, enterprise will find its way to make this successful and get the outcomes you want. Saying that FDI is coming into retail is not the reform. If you were to say that we are reforming the APMC Act, that is a reform.
Can you quickly tell what APMC Act is, for those of us who aren't well versed with it? You or Vikas, you've written a lot about it, so maybe this is the time to turn to you.
It stands for Agricultural Product Marketing Commission. So what the APMC Act does is gives a monopoly over wholesale trade to a committee of traders. What Meera is talking about is that the fact is that these guys are charging a very high premium for the role they play in the distribution chain. And the argument that a lot of people make is, and with justification, is that if you actually simplified those laws and got rid of those monopoly statuses that these committees have, actually food prices would come down.
And I had one more question for you, which goes back to a point Vivek made, which was a provocative one for those who think that small shops will suffer. And he gave the example that small shops aren't always affected. Reflecting on your time, both in Thailand and the United States, do you think that's true?
What happened in Thailand is interesting, and China is also an interesting example. both of those countries have opened up their retail markets in the last 2 decades or so. And in both cases, the percentage of the market that is dominated by so-called organized retail is still much less than 50%. In China, it's only about 20%. In Thailand, I think it's somewhere in 30 or 40% range. They opened, I think, a decade before China did. China opened about 10 years ago. And there's lots of Walmarts in China. They call something else. I forget the name. But they have not been able to, decimate, if you will, or kill off small retail. It hasn't happened. In fact, because the retail market in both of those countries have continued to grow, the small retailers have also grown. Obviously, some of them, I'm sure, have closed. Just like, Starbucks, when a Starbucks opens somewhere in the US, some local coffee shop probably does go out of business. But net, it hasn't been the case that the big foreign retailers have essentially decimated an entire culture of small shops.
Question here and then here, yeah.
Is anything being debated or done in the current FDI debate, especially in Indian context, if there are some ways to balance this, the negative impact of foreign investment or the possible negative impact of foreign investment on these kirana stores, on the small farmers, from the government's point of view, in terms of regulation?
It's a very basic argument that if you allow investment to come in, that it's a win-win proposition both for the lender and for the borrower. Now, having said that, are there people going to be adversely affected? Sure. And part of the problem that I think I talked about earlier on is the case was never made. The case was never made as to who are going to be the winners, who are going to be the losers, that the gains for consumers, and I think also for the farmers, will outweigh the potential losses to a small number of small retailers. And that there has to be some compensation. They have to be integrated into the system in some other way. So I agree with you that there are distributional consequences we've got to deal with. And certainly no one that I know is making this sort of blanket laissez-faire assertion that let's just have a free-for-all. That's not what anyone I think has been saying, or should be saying.
Why everybody is opposing the foreign trade in retail? In the sense that the panel is almost unanimous in saying that, well, FDI is good, and FDI in probably everything is good. Because, what spark of this question was, just today morning I read a statement by Badal. In 1 week's time, he completely changed his stand on FDI. He was for FDI, and he's gone against FDI.
The people who are going to lose the most from this are actually not the kirana store owners. They will lose certainly something. Some share of their market they will lose. But I think the people who lose the most is the wholesale trade. For better or for worse, that is a core constituency of the BJP. And the BJP is partners with Mr. Badal in Punjab, put a lot of pressure. It appears to me that they put a lot of pressure on the Badals to change. Because initially what Badal said was that this is going to be good because it will help my farmers. And it was exactly what the farmers in Jalandhar told me. The ones I spoke to said, we want this because we're sick of going to the mandi. We want more, we want Walmart, we want Bharti, we want Reliance, we want Biani, we want all of them to come here and bid for our business.
I think the closest market that we have here is the Colaba market. I think most of us have been there. Now, if I was given my way, I would put a bulldozer and remove that market. And I'll tell you why. How many retailers are there? 250? 500? 500? We agree on that? 500 retailers? Their suppliers, their families, total figure, 5,000 people, they would definitely be affected. But let's just stop and think for the customers. How many people live in Colaba? 5 lakh people? So our politicians, for the sake of 5,000 people, are affecting the lives of 5 lakh people.
You're saying that why are we hurting 5 lakh people for 5,000 people? Because the 5 lakh people are not going to go on the street and say, I demand a Walmart here right now. But the 5,000 people whose shops are going to get bulldozed, they're going to go on the streets and say, you're destroying my livelihood, don't put a Walmart here. In the grand scheme of things, I don't think either of those two extreme outcomes is going to happen. I don't think we're going to ever bulldoze the Colaba market, and probably a lot of people in Colaba like it. You may not like it, but a lot of other people like it. And a lot of people will continue to shop there. So oftentimes this debate is made so polarizing that it's hard to see what is actually going to happen.
Is this more about you want FDI in retail or you need FDI in retail? I think there's been a sort of a blurring in this. I think it's more in terms of people wanting it rather than India needing it.
I think we've all said actually neither is true. You don't need foreign direct investment. What you need is really the best practices, the technology, the markets to work in such a way that the farmers get better prices and the consumer pays less and there's less wastage and rotting of food.
I think we used Walmart a lot as a punching bag or as a glorified icon in this conversation. But this is not really about Walmart, it's about professionalizing retail. That what is it about that entity, whether it's Walmart or somebody else, which employs only 1/20th of the people and gets such good turnover? What is it about their productive processes which makes it so efficient? And if those were to be replicated with 44 billion, how much more wonderful and great the turnover could be and how much larger the economy could be. I think that's probably one way of looking at the issue going forward. I've learned a lot. It's been a fascinating session to listen to a banker who tells stories, to listen to a reporter who reports facts and doesn't give opinions, and to an economist who's circumspect about reforms. And I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you.